I'm your host, Sean MacKenzie. Thank you for joining me once again on my channel on data engineering. In this episode, we go back to our Microsoft Access playlist, and we're going to take a look at a viewer request on composite keys. Now, this was a pretty cool request, and in the request, the requirement was that we have a category for one of the keys and an integer, incrementing integer for the other part of the key. But if certain records got deleted, the integers needed to be able to be reused. And so that means that we have to have some logic in there to reuse the integer if it gets deleted, if a record gets deleted in a particular category. Let's get to it. Want to check out some additional cool material on this topic? Make sure to check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. So this is a pretty fun one today. This is a viewer request. Many thanks for this request. And we'll go ahead and take a look at this. So this is a composite key example. And it's a composite key with a reusable integer as part of the composite key. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go to the create ribbon there. We created a table in table design here, and we're going to go ahead and make some fields. And the first thing we're going to need for this kind of key is we're going to need to have, first of all, a couple of fields. So the first one, I'm going to make the item name, and my default field size is 32 there. And then the item ID is going to be a number which defaults to a long integer here, and we're going to use those two fields for our primary key. And the primary key will make it so that we cannot enter the same combination of items twice, and so it'll create an error each time if we try to do that. And the item text, we'll add one field just for fun, just so that we can have another field in our table as if you were building some kind of table. There we go, we've got our item name, our ID, and item text, which is not really important. The first two are important, so there we go. I'm going to select those two fields in our design, and then I'll go to the table design ribbon, and I'm going to select the primary key for that. And that's going to set those two fields as our primary key, so there cannot be any duplicates between the item name and the ID for that item. And so just like in the example that we had where egg could be 1, egg could be 2, we can't have another egg 1 in there. And so you can see that we've got a required entry for the item name. And now in this case we have allow 0 length equal to yes, but you can set that to 0 if you don't want to allow an empty string in there, but it won't allow a null. And we can see that our item ID is also required, and you can see that it's indexed and it's yes, it's got duplicates okay, and that's because it will allow duplicates when the name is different, but it won't allow a duplicate if the name is the same. And so there we go, we've got our two key fields, and that's going to make sure that it's unique and it won't allow any duplicates to be put into our table. And I'll do a Control S here, and I'll save this table, and we can go ahead and we can continue. So I'll call this TBL item, and TBL item will have our rows in it, our records, and we can go ahead and start looking at how we can put a composite key into effect using a form. And so part of this is the solution is to use the table composite key, and the other part of the solution is to have some logic to create the key each time. And so the first thing we'll do is I'm going to go to the create ribbon, and I'm going to the form wizard over on the right there. I'm just going to grab all of these fields, and I'm just going to take the default output here. We've got our columnar report, which is basically one row per page, and I'll call it FRM item. And I'm not going to change any design because it's not really important. The form in this example is secondary. The form is just to show how to implement the numbering, and so it's going to be very basic in our design here. And so I'll go back to the design view of that form, and I'm just going to click on the item name here. I'm going to change that to a combo box so that we can add a few drop-down items in here, so I don't have to type in egg or rice each time. And I'm going to put something into the row source here, but before I do that, I'm going to change our row source type to value list, and then I will just put in a few entries here. You might populate this from another table or something, but for today's example, I just need a couple of selections in my drop down so that I can make a nice easy demonstration. So there we go, we've got egg, rice, and oil in our drop down box, and I can go ahead and close that. I'll save it, and now if I open that form, I can see those items in my drop down list. And so this is what our very basic form looks like here. We've got 3 fields, and you can see we've got egg, rice, and oil in our drop down list, and we've got a 0 in the item ID, which is the default value. So this is not a record yet. It's actually in new record mode, so it's waiting for some entry before it creates a new record in the system. And so you can see there's our 0. This record has nothing in it, and we can go ahead. Now we've got a form that we can display our records in. We're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new module with a function, a very simple function to just give us the ID, the next ID for an item if we ask for it. Now you'll note that I'm creating this in a module which is not connected to the form that I created, and the reason for that is that we want to be able to reuse this function all throughout our Microsoft Access application that we're building. So if we create a record somewhere else, we want to be able to call this function to get the next ID for bread or oil or rice or whatever. And so we don't want it to be tied to a particular form. We want this to be available all throughout our program, and so by putting it in a module and giving it a function, which is the default is for a public function, that's going to make it available everywhere. And so I'll put a little comment at the top here. I'm making a function called nextID, and we're going to pass in the name of the item that we want to know the next available key for. So we're going to pass in egg or bread or whatever it is, oil or whatever it is that we had in our list. Each time we ask for the next available ID, we're going to pass in the name of the other part of the composite key. And so what we're going to do is we're going to generate the long integer. So the function is going to return a long, which is a long integer, and we're going to specify at the end of this function the long integer that we're going to return. And so during the function, we're going to go and we're going to find out what the next available integer is. Because if we have, say, 10 records for egg, but someone deleted 4, the number 4, according to the requirement, we want the next egg that's put in to be number 4. So we want to reuse the integers as part of our requirements, and that's what we're going to do now. So we're going to get some variables here together, and so we'll go ahead and get our database variable. We'll do db as dao.database, rst as dao.recordset. We're going to get an item as a long integer, and we'll do an SQL string, and we're going to, in this case, we'll just go ahead and we'll build it, and we'll go ahead and we'll put select item ID from TBL items. where item name is equal to the name that we passed in. And so we can go ahead and we'll put that name in there. We're going to do a dynamic SQL string here today. We can also do this using a parameter if you are using this in a customer facing application. Very easy to change that. But we'll go ahead, we'll put in the name of the item here in single quotes, and then we'll order it by item ID. It will probably be default ordered by item ID anyway when we select it this way, but we want to make sure we specify that anyway. So there's our fields. We're getting item ID, and we're going to order by that item ID, and that gives us a lot of power because now we can go through that list and we can see which is the next one available. We're going to go ahead and pass in that item name as the string there. Okay, so we're good to go. Let's set our database equal to current DB, and we'll set that to nothing at the end of our procedure. We'll just make sure that's a little bit of cleanup that we like to do. And we'll set our RST equal to db.openRecordSet, and we'll put in the SQL string there, and we're going to use the snapshot, which is a little faster because it is a read-only record set that's returned. We like that for this case because when we get up into tens or hundreds of thousands of records in our system, we want it to be as fast as possible. We'll initialize our item, our long item there, and we'll initialize that to 0, and then we're going to do a loop, and we're going to do a partial pass over this record set. So what that means is we're going to go as far as we need to. We don't want to go through the whole thing once we discover one that's missing. We're going to go right through that loop, and if we find one that's empty that needs to be reused, we're going to exit our do loop to save time. And so here we go. We can we're starting to walk through our record set here, and the first thing we're going to do is we're going to set that item equal to item plus 1. So now the item is equal to item plus 1, and we're going to check on each time the loop goes through. We're going to say if the ID in the record set does not equal the item, the long item variable, then we're going to exit do. But the long item variable has been set, so that's been stored in there. So we're just going to exit out of that loop. So there's our do loop. We're moving to the next record each time. We're incrementing the item, and then we're checking it to see if it matches. And if it doesn't match, we're going to get out of that loop. And so that's going to leave long item there. It's going to leave it with the value that we want. And that's going to be great. That'll give us exactly what we want, unless it hits EOF, which means that it made it all the way through, but it didn't find it. And in that case, what we're going to do is after the loop is done, we're going to say, okay, well, if it made it to all the way to the end of the records, well, we're going to increment our item by 1. And how could that happen? Well, that can happen two ways. It can be if there's no records that match, then BOF and EOF are both true. So that means that we'll increment by 1, which means we'll get 1, which is the first one. And if it goes through all of the records and it makes it to the end, then we know they're all sequential. And there's no missing ones, and so we're just going to add 1 onto the end of that one as well. So if it's 10, it'll be 11. If it's 50, it'll be 51. And so that's how we're going to get that ID. And now we can close that record set. We'll set the RST equal to nothing, and we're going to set the value of the function next ID equal to long item at the very end. And so that's our long integer variable there. We're going to set it to 0. And as it goes through the function, it loops through, and then when it finds an ID integer value that is missing, it will exit and leave itself on that value, and that means that it's a partial pass of the record set, a partial walkthrough, and If it goes all the way through and it finds that it is EOF, then of course it made it all the way, and then we're just going to increment by 1. So we can test this out. I'll do Control G, and that'll bring up the immediate window here. And so I'll just ask for what the next one is here for egg, and I already got an error, so let's check it out. So the error, now it says item not found in this collection, which I'll just check the name. So that's TBL item, non-plural, and I put in TBL items. There we go. So that's the first error. Let's see if we got any more in here. So if I hit go, it says the next ID available is 1. Now we can only see ones from here because we're not inserting any records yet. But it looks like if I put in rice or whatever, we get 1, which is our first one. Since it goes through and both BOF and EOF are both true, it adds 1 to the integer, and that returns a 1. Okay, so now we can go back to our form. Now that we have a working function, we'll test it some more. We have not tried it where it actually goes into the loop yet, so we might still get some errors. But we'll go ahead and we'll work on our form. Now I'm going to click on item name, which is the control for it. I'm going to change the name of the control to CBO item name. Now you'll notice it still says item name there, and that's because that's the control source, which is the field called item name in the table to which this form is bound. And so I've changed the name of the control so that I can reference the control itself, the combo box that we created, because we want to be able to talk to that control without accidentally referencing the table field name or something like that. And I'm going to change the control source. I'm going to delete the control source from that combo box. So now it says unbound in it, and you'll see up here we still have our CBO item name, and we're going to go into the events for that, and we're going to select the after update. We're going to choose the code builder, and that's going to give us a place where we can write some code, because we're going to insert both of the key values together at the same time. And what having the unbound control allows us to do is it allows us to get that value before we do an insert, and also calculate the, first select the value, then request the next key available, and then we're going to put them in at the same time onto the form. So we'll go ahead, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if the item name is null, then we're just going to exit. We're not going to do anything in that case. We don't want to try to create a new value with nulls in it. That'll just create an error. And we can go ahead and we'll say if the numeric part of the ID is null, or if it's equal to 0, which is the default value that we do not want according to our requirements, then we're going to do some stuff. We're going to create a new record, and we're going to calculate that new record item ID, and we can do that here. And so I'll go ahead and I'll create a new variable called long item, which is a long integer. We're going to load that integer variable with the next ID for whatever it is that we're putting in, whatever we chose in CBO item name. So we can go ahead and get our integer, the next available one, whether it's in the beginning or at the end or somewhere in the middle of the key sequence. We can go ahead and grab the next one. So I'll set that equal to next ID, and we're going to pass in the CBO item name as I mentioned, and now we've got that value. And so once we've got that, now we can set the value of item name on the form, which is the field. That is a field reference now, because there is no control called item name anymore. And so we can just go ahead and set the value of item name equal to the CBO value, which is the control, and we can set the item ID equal to the long item that we requested, and that is the composite key, so we can create a new record using those two values. And so I'll go back to the design here, and I'm also going to go to the form properties, so you can click in that gray area at the bottom below the form footer to quickly get the form, and then go to events and then click on form current, and that will give you the form current subroutine, and that's going to run every time a new record or a record is navigated to, and because we want to populate our combo box with the value that's in the field each time we navigate to a field. So what we've effectively done is we've created an unbound control, and we're loading it each time that we're going through, and that's going to help us to do this. Now I'm going back to the form view, so now we've got no records in our table yet, but if I select something in the list here, you can see now it generates that first item there, the item ID of 1 for egg, and you can see if I can type some more data into this, into the item text, as if you had some record with the dual or composite key. And so that creates our first record, and if I close and reopen that form, I'll just open it here. You can see the new record is allowed there, so I can go ahead and create a new one. And if I select say rice, then we'll get our first record for rice, and that is what we want to see there. And if I back out here and go back, it refreshes the record set for the form when you back through the records, so that's something you could add in to make the new record selector available, or you could just use another method. Now if I use rice again, oh, we got ourselves an error, so let's check it out. So I'll hit debug on that, and we'll see what's going on. So it stopped on this line right here, so this is good for you guys to see how troubleshooting works. I put in RST ID, but actually the field name is item ID, so if I fix that item ID, now you can see it fixed itself. I hit the play icon at the top of that code window after I fixed it, just so you know, and that resumed the code execution. So there you go. Now we've got 2 in there. If I create another new one, if I choose rice again, I get 3, and if I scroll through here, I can see all my selections. There's egg and rice 1, 2, and 3. I can scroll to a new record, and I can choose rice again for number 4, and I can check out, you can see all of the other selections here as well, and so that is something that's very handy. Now if I go and I choose, say, number 1 from rice, and I hit the delete key on my keyboard, you can see it gives a message to delete that record. So now I've deleted rice number 1. You can see there's egg 1, rice 2, rice 3, rice 4, and you can see that it has been deleted, number 1. So if I go back here and I choose rice, you'll see it gives me item ID number 1 again. So I'm reusing that integer as part of the composite key, and I can scroll back through all of my items here, and I can see the values that are there. So I can choose egg again and get a number 2, and it still works in the same way that we anticipate. And I can scroll through here and I can see egg, there's egg 1 and 2, and then I can choose another egg and get number 3. And that's really cool. That's what we want to see, is the items in our table. And you will notice that these might get resorted when you reopen your form. because it will actually group these together. I'll show that at the end. I'll delete egg number 2 just for fun here, and now egg number 3 is showing because we deleted number 2. Egg number 1 is at the very beginning of our record set. If I go new one and I choose egg again, it's going to give me number 2. So there we go. So that's egg number 2, and that's exactly how you can do a composite key in Microsoft Access with reusable integer as part of the key. Interested in the files used in these videos? Make sure to check out my downloads page. The link is in the description.